Hi everyone, my name is Danielle and I'm a long-time Age of Mythology player. In this video, I want to talk about combat fundamentals in Age of Mythology Retold. I also have a very special resource to give you guys, so check the description and stick around until the end to find out more. Many of you will be familiar with combat triangles from the games you play. The warrior unit is strong against the ranger unit, who is strong against the mage, who in turn is strong against the warrior unit. Or the grass Pokemon beats the water Pokemon, who beats the fire Pokemon, who then beats the grass Pokemon. Age of Mythology also has combat triangles. The heroes are strong against myth units, which are strong against human units, which are strong against heroes. The ranged units are strong against the infantry units, which are strong against the cavalry units, which in turn are strong against the ranged units. Except, this is not entirely true. In fact, for as many units that follow the ranged versus infantry versus cavalry versus ranged combat triangle logic, there are just as many units who go against the grain. Let's dive further into this and other combat quirks, but first, let's rehash some basics. Typically, the infantry and cavalry units in AOM will do hack damage, the ranged units will do pierce damage, and the siege units will do crush damage. The damage taken by these respective damage types can be reduced by the armour values of the unit under attack. A Jarl with no upgrades does 10 hack damage per second. A Herseer with no upgrades has 20% hack armour. This means that 20% of the 10 hack damage inflicted on the Herseer will be negated, and the Jarl will effectively do 8 hack damage per second to a Herseer. An Atlantean Murmillo, on the other hand, has 40% hack armour, meaning the Jarl will inflict only 6 hack damage per second to this unit. Pretty easy, right? Now let's look at our humble Egyptian axeman. This guy deals 5 hack damage per second, half of that of our beefy expensive Jarl, so we would expect our Atlantean Murmillo with 40% hack armour to receive 3 hack damage per second, right? But wait, what's going on? Our axeman is demolishing the Murmillo, and in a simulated combat we can see that the group of axemen clean up the group of Murmillo faster than the same amount of Jarls do. If we take a closer look at the axeman, we can actually see a very vital stat here. Our axeman has a 4 times damage multiplier versus infantry units. This means that instead of the 5 hack damage before armour modifiers, they are capable of inflicting a maximum of 20 hack damage per second against infantry units. If we take into account the armour of the Murmillo, they are still doing 12 hack damage per second, which is double that of the Jarl. There are 2 things we can take away from this. The first is, do not always trust the combat triangle. Take the time to read the unit tooltips and check the damage multipliers. The second thing is that the damage multiplier should not be underestimated. Most of the human units will have a damage multiplier against a certain unit type, or even multipliers against 2 or 3 unit types, and these multipliers can range from what would be considered a soft counter, like the hoplite with a 1.25 damage multiplier versus cavalry, to units that would be considered a hard counter, like the Herpaspist with a 5 times damage multiplier versus infantry. Now you know about damage multipliers, you need to know what to use these damage multipliers against. Most of the time, your expectation of infantry units, ranged units, and cavalry units is correct. A Toxote is just a ranged unit. A Hippias is just a cavalry unit. That's easy. But what about the Norse-throwing axemen? Is this a ranged unit or an infantry unit? Well, the truth is, it's both. So units with a damage multiplier against ranged units will fare well against this unit, as will units with a damage multiplier against infantry units. There are currently 3 other human units with dual unit types. The Egyptian chariot archer is both a ranged and cavalry unit, and so is the Atlantean Terma. Meanwhile, the Atlantean Chiroballista is both a ranged and siege unit. Be aware though that the Terma does not benefit from cavalry line upgrades, such as heavy cavalry, but will benefit from any relics that affect cavalry. Now, what about our Greek heroes? Is Achilles a cavalry unit? Is Odysseus a ranged unit? What is Chiron, a ranged and cavalry unit? Well, the Greek heroes are not classed in such a manner. Both the Greek and Egyptian heroes, such as priests and pharaohs, do not get assigned ranged infantry or cavalry roles, and therefore do not take extra damage from any unit damage multipliers. The Greek and Egyptian heroes are also not affected by line upgrades, such as the medium infantry technology, but rather scale up per age, from archaic through to mythic age. Our Norse heroes, the Herseer and Godi, are different. A Herseer is an infantry type, and the Godi is a ranged type. Therefore, units that have damage multipliers against infantry will do well against Herseer, and units that have a damage multipliers against ranged units will do well against Godi. Despite this, these two heroes are not affected by line upgrades. A Herseer will not benefit from the medium infantry technology, even though he is technically an infantry unit. Just like with the Greek and Egyptian heroes, the Norse heroes also scale up with age. The Atlantean heroes are different again. All Atlantean heroes, with the exception of the Oracle, who does not have a unit type, have the same unit type as their non-hero version. A hero Chiroballista is still a ranged and siege unit, and will therefore be punished by anti-range and anti-siege units. The Atlantean heroes do not scale by age, but instead scale by line upgrades, such as medium archers. The one thing all our heroes across all pantheons do have in common, though, is that they are all affected by armory upgrades, so make sure you are getting your armory upgrades when you can. Okay, now we've learnt that some units do not really have a unit type, and some units have multiple unit types, but did you know that some units do multiple types of damage? An example of this is siege ships and some siege units. All siege ships, Heliopolis, Petropolis, Catapult, Ballista, and Fire Siphon, do both pierce and crush damage in the same attack. The unupgraded Egyptian catapult, for example, does 10 pierce damage and 50 crush damage per second, so it can effectively deal a maximum of 60 damage per second. Of course, this is reduced by the respective pierce and crush armour of a unit or building. One exception to this dual attack type for siege units is the Egyptian siege tower. This unit does crush damage against buildings and pierce damage against units, but never both damage types at the same time. There is another unit worth mentioning with different damage types, the Egyptian priest and pharaoh. These heroes will do pierce damage against non-myth units and divine damage against myth units, but never both damage types at the same time. But wait, what's divine damage? I'm glad you asked. Divine damage is a special attack type which completely ignores any armor values a unit has. There is no such thing as divine armor yet, so what you see is what you get when it comes to how much divine damage a unit can deal. At this moment, there are only a handful of units who deal divine damage out of the box. The Egyptian heroes, including Son of Osiris, Bellerophon and Perseus, and Myrmidons. However, keep an eye out for some technologies which will grant your units divine damage. Phobos' Spear of Panic, for example, will give your Prodromos, Hoplite, and Militia 1 divine damage each. Speaking of good-to-know technologies, I want to direct your attention to ballistics, which is researched in the armory. Unlike in the legacy version of Age of Mythology, your ranged units and buildings will not be able to hit a moving target unless the target is walking into the path of the projectile. This is because your ranged unit will aim and fire in the direction the target was when it was issued the attack command. However, researching ballistics allows your units and buildings to predict where a unit will be if it continues its current path, meaning it can aim and fire in the direction the target will be if it stays on its course. This will result in a much higher hit rate and means the enemy units will have a much harder time dodging projectiles. I have 3 more mini tips for you guys before we move on to the special gift I promised at the beginning of the video. Number 1. The only unit that has a damage multiplier versus siege is villagers, or gatherers, labourers, dwarves, and citizens. Otherwise, any unit that has a high hack damage will be the best counter against siege units. Number 2. There is currently no unit with a positive damage multiplier against villagers. However, the Carnivora and Plague of Serpents god powers actually have a negative damage multiplier against villagers and do 50 and 90% less damage to this unit type respectively. And number 3. Every time infantry units hit an enemy target, they slow the target by 15% for 2 seconds. This can be brutal when attempting to retreat armies or villages, so use this to your advantage when you have the offensive upper hand. Okay, now we have covered what I consider the combat fundamentals for Age of Mythology Retold, and I can understand it was probably a lot of detail to take in all at once. That is why I have created a Google Sheets document for you, which lists the combat stats for all human units, heroes, ships, and siege in the game. This document makes it easy to compare the unupgraded attack and armor stats of units and check damage multipliers. Use the filters to compare units of the same type, and use the checkboxes underneath the tables to check the stats of units when certain upgrades are applied. I will be adding new versions of this document whenever a major patch is released, and I will be slowly adding checkboxes for all technologies, so you can make thorough comparisons across a range of situations. Note that in order to use the checkboxes, you will need to create a copy of the document so it is editable. You can also download the document to use with other spreadsheet software, but please note that I've created the logic for the checkboxes using a Google Apps script, which may not be compatible with other spreadsheet scripts. You can find the link to this document in the video description, as well as a Google form for submitting any feedback or bugs you may find in the spreadsheet. Please note, one thing I've already noticed is that you can't spam click the checkboxes, as there is a small window of calculation time needed between each click. So that is my gift to you guys, and I hope you find it to be a valuable resource. My final tip to you is to pair this combat knowledge with good in-game scouting. Try to consistently and constantly see what your opponent is building and training, and use your new knowledge of counter units to ensure you are building an army that will have a strategic advantage in any engagement. If this proves to be tricky, which is completely understandable, a viable strategy might be to make units with a high base damage. Train either a strong all-round infantry or cavalry unit, plus a ranged unit for backline support. And as always, ensure you have myth units and heroes in the mix. Okay, thanks for watching guys. I really hope you enjoy playing Age of Mythology Retold, and I hope to see you soon with a new video. Bye!